Hello, I'm Ed Stabler, and this is the Texas State Railroad. On this program, we'll explore the history of the area and of a wonderful short line railroad in East Texas that runs between Rusk and Palestine. We'll take a look at passenger service, at freight extras, at photographer specials, which are run several times a year for real fan photographers. We'll even have some very special photography with cameras placed on the locomotives themselves, and this provides a very unusual view of the railroad. So, let's take a look. Come on along. In 1881, the Texas State Penitentiary in Rusk decided to build a railroad to haul hardwood in for the furnaces that fired its iron smelter. Among other iron products supplied to the state by this operation were several components for the Capitol building in Austin. The Rusk Transportation Company tramway was the original railroad serving Rusk and was constructed in 1874 with rails made of pine. This was an effort to connect the town of Rusk with the International and Great Northern Railroad in Jacksonville. The original Texas State track was constructed to 3-foot narrow gauge. The gauge used by all mainline railroads in the United States today is 4 feet 8 1/2 inches and is referred to as standard gauge. In the last 2 decades of the 19th century, it was common for railroads that didn't interchange railroad cars with other lines or that were located in mountainous areas to be constructed as narrow gauge because of significant cost savings. As the Texas State Railroad grew, it became apparent that cars would indeed need to be interchanged with other railroads in Rusk, and the line was subsequently converted to standard gauge. In 1906, prison inmates extended the Texas State Railroad west all the way to Palestine in Anderson County. There, the railroad was able to interchange with the International and Great Northern, which later became the Missouri Pacific. On the Rusk end, the Texas State was already interchanging with the Southern Pacific and the St. Louis and Southwestern.
Well, Texas State Railroad started off as a railroad built by the Texas State Prison System to connect a iron ore foundry located here in Rusk that was part of the East Texas State Penitentiary, and connect that with the outside world over in Palestine, where the International Great Northern, or later the Missouri Pacific Railroad, operated. And it was intended to haul the output of this iron ore works to market, and it actually only fulfilled that duty for a few years before the iron furnaces were shut down by the state prison system. It was then leased to the Southern Pacific Company, the Texas and New Orleans subsidiary of the Southern Pacific Company. They operated it from early 1920s to 1969, and they hauled whatever freight they could find out here. They did a lot of logging, a lot of lumber business around here, and did some produce business too. And they gave up the lease on the railroad in 1960, and it was then passed on to a little short line that's based southeast of here in a little town called Diboll. The railroad's called the Texas Southeastern, and they operated it as a isolated railroad from the rest of their system from 1960 to about 1969, where they gave up on the operation. It wasn't making any money for them anymore. But during all that time, the railroad still remained property of the state of Texas, and it was leased out to these various companies. So when Texas Southeastern gave up, it reverted back to the state, and they were trying to figure out what to do with it. Some people wanted to just tear the thing up and make a hiking trail out of it, but it was decided that they ought to try to make a excursion train out of it. So the whole property was transferred to the State Parks and Wildlife Division, who rebuilt and created the Texas State Railroad we have today. Parks and Wildlife started out with a 25 miles of rusty weed-grown track with nothing along it, and everything you see today was created by them. The depots at both ends, the shops, upgrade of the track, all the locomotives, all of the cars and all that were brought in here by Parks and Wildlife. And we owe them a great debt for the amount of money that they put into this place to make it the facility we have today.
Just east of the Rusk Depot is the Y. Y is a railroad term for a three-point track arrangement used for turning equipment around. Here we see TSR number 300 beginning a trip around the Y. At the end of the Y, or the tail, number 300 reverses direction and heads back toward the main line. The Rusk campground is on both sides of the track here, and campers are afforded an up-close view of the action. This Y is not original to the railroad. It was constructed in 1970 when the tourist railroad operation that we have today was created. Further east of the Rusk Depot across Highway 84 is the former junction of the Cotton Belt and the Texas State Railroad. Cotton Belt was a nickname for the St. Louis and Southwestern Railroad, which was owned by the much larger Southern Pacific. In 2011, the city of Rusk began clearing the Texas State Railroad's main line in this area so as to access a new industrial park under construction. In doing so, the junction here was revealed for the first time in decades. The Cotton Belt track ran from this junction to its yard and depot in Rusk. This is where the yard was once located. The final Texas State train to use these rails was operated by the Texas Southeastern Railroad on December 31st, 1969. Only occasional freights used the Cotton Belt track in the 1980s, and the last train left town in 1987. The railroad crosses Highway 84 at this location known as either McCrossum or State Crossing. This was milepost 590 on the Cotton Belt and milepost 2 on the original Texas State. Today, it is milepost 0.0. This is the locomotive maintenance shop and car storage yard. It would appear that the regular passenger train is coming in from the city of Rusk and heading past the Texas State Railroad shop to the depot. However, looks can be deceiving. This is a recreation done for photographers in 2012. Despite being done for show, this is likely the first passenger train to use these rails in many decades. On the far east side of the active portion of the railroad, the Texas State has its primary maintenance facility and equipment storage yard. Here, locomotives are restored and repaired. A tremendous amount of tender, loving care, no pun intended, is required every day to keep these century-old machines running in pristine condition. This facility was constructed in the 1970s by the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. Ready for a hard day's work, Texas State Railroad number 300 heads out of the shop yard toward the depot to pick up her train of passengers. The original Rusk Depot was located close to the center of town and is no longer standing. The depot in use today was completed in 1977 by the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department and stands about 3 miles west of downtown Rusk. It is at 430 feet above sea level and is located at milepost 0.5. It's constructed out of native stone. In addition to a ticket office and gift shop, the depot houses the railroad's administrative offices and has a 60-seat theater. Prior to the new depot, the passengers were loaded at the camping shelter in the park near the Y. Trains turned on the Y in Palestine and returned to Rusk without stopping until the depot there was completed in October 1977. Trackside at the depot is a great place to catch the action of an operating steam railroad. Here's a special mixed freight train for Memorial Day in 2011. Each year, the North American Railcar Operators Association, or NARCOA, meets to run their motor cars across the railroad. This is a terrific way to get a close-up view of the line. After being serviced during the early morning hours, Texas and Pacific number 316 moves from the engine house to the depot where she'll couple onto her train. 316 is a 460 or 10-wheeler. This means she has 4 pilot wheels in front, 6 driving wheels, and no trailing wheels under the cab. She was built by Cook Locomotive Works in 1901 and worked for the Texas and Pacific Railroad until 1949. She was then sold to the Paris and Mount Pleasant Railroad, where she worked until being retired in 1951. An anonymous donor purchased the locomotive for display in Abilene, Texas. In 1974, the city of Abilene donated the locomotive to the Texas State Railroad, where she became number 201 after an extensive rebuild by Hahn and Clay Company in Houston. Number 316 weighs 79 tons and has an operating boiler pressure of 200 pounds per square inch. With driving wheels of 63-inch diameter, Stevenson valve gear, and 20 by 26-inch cylinders, she can deliver 28,000 pounds of tractive effort. Her tender holds 5,350 gallons of water and 2,500 gallons of recycled automotive oil. The locomotive will use nearly an entire tender full of water pulling a train from Rusk to Palestine. In October and November of 2012, General Manager Earl Noob had Texas State Railroad number 201 repainted and relettered to her original appearance as Texas and Pacific number 316. This began a program of remarking all of the Texas State locomotives to one of their original owning railroads. These efforts to preserve our history are greatly appreciated by historians and rail fans alike. Here we see Texas State number 7, a 1947-built Alco RS-2 diesel locomotive arriving with a special train from the annual Pumpkin Patch event as the regular passenger train prepares to depart. Texas State Railroad number 300 West is preparing to depart Rusk, bound for Palestine. Number 300 was built by Baldwin Locomotive Works in 1917 for the U.S. Army. This class of locomotive is known as a General Pershing. Number 300 was later sold to the Tremont and Gulf Railroad, where she was given the number 28. She was then sold to the Southern Pine Lumber Company before being donated to the Texas State Railroad in 1973. Number 300 is a 280, or consolidation. She weighs 83 tons, has a boiler pressure of 190 pounds per square inch, cylinders of 21 by 28 inches, Walshart's valve gear, 56-inch driving wheels, and can deliver 35,610 pounds of tractive effort. Her tender holds 6,500 gallons of water and 2,400 gallons of recycled automotive oil. Now that we've explored Rusk, let's head west and take a look at the rest of the railroad. The first location of note west of Rusk is Oakland Crossing. Oakland is 440 feet above sea level and located at milepost 2.2. The railroad climbs a 2% grade coming from both directions and crosses County Road 2103 at the top. A 2% grade means that the track rises 2 feet in height for every 100 feet of travel. This is considered steep in modern railroad construction. Oakland was settled sometime after the Civil War. By 1896, a school and store were constructed. The local church was built in 1916, and the oldest grave in the cemetery is from 1874. After World War II, the school was closed, and today only the church, cemetery, and a few houses remain. population is somewhere around 50. This is TSR number 300 West coming up the 2% grade from Rusk and storming through Oakland Crossing. On a different day, we find TSR number 300 coming from the opposite direction, but still coming up a 2% grade. Note the switch and siding on the left. This is Beans Creek siding, milepost 2.6. At the same location near Beans Creek siding, but viewed from trackside, we see Texas and Pacific number 316 East heading up the hill to Oakland and on to Rusk. From County Road 2103, we catch T&P 316 roaring through the crossing, heading east to Rusk. Fairchild Hill is located at milepost 5.1. The ascent up this hill is the most dramatic on the railroad. The summit is 500 feet above sea level and the approaches start at about 440 feet. The grade is primarily 2% in both directions. However, near the summit it increases sharply to approximately 2.5%, forcing the locomotives to work hard and put on an awesome show of power. T&P 316 descends the eastern slope of Fairchild Hill. Let's ride along with 316 all the way to the summit as she ascends the eastern slope. West of Fairchild Hill and County Road 2108 is milepost 5.4. This location offers a variety of views for photography. First up is a double header with Texas State number 201 and number 300. The train is going west with a photographer's special in 2011. Here's number 316 heading east with another photographer's special, this one in 2012. Here's a conductor's view aboard TSR caboose number 129. The only surviving town located on the Texas State Railroad today is Midale. It's at milepost 7.2 and sits about 411 feet above sea level. Camp Searcy Baker was built at this location in 1904 as an extension of the state prison in Rusk. In addition to constructing the railroad on its way west, the inmates also cut trees to support the coking operation in Rusk. In 1907, the camp was reorganized as Camp Wright, and in 1909, the town of Midale was established, named in honor of the daughter of Texas Governor Thomas Campbell, the second native Texas governor who was born near Rusk and was instrumental in the extension of the Texas State Railroad to Palestine. By 1914, Midale had blossomed into a thriving community with several churches, a bank, a cotton gin, and 4 general stores. The population peaked at 450 in 1929, dropped to 150 during the Depression, and is settled today at 250. Until 1946, the Texas Southeastern Railroad hauled timber from Pastoral, Texas, to a connection with the Texas State near the Neches River, and then east to Midale for finishing. Since the tourist railroad was created in 1972, the Maintenance of Way Department has been headquartered across the street from the Midale Depot. In fact, prior to the engine houses being constructed in Rusk and Palestine, all locomotive and rail car maintenance was done here. This building, located near the turntable, is the only surviving structure from the original railroad. Today, the men and women who keep the track in top shape are based in Midale. One of the most prominent features of Midale is the turntable obtained from the Frisco Yard in Paris, Texas, and installed by the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department in 1979. Locomotives could then be turned for the trip back to Rusk during the construction of the new Neches River concrete trestle in 79 and 80. Locomotives are turned using compressed air from the engine to power a small motor beneath the track. While steam locomotives can operate equally well in either direction, it's preferred to run forward for enhanced safety and crew comfort. So having a way to turn them in Midale enables the railroad to make short runs for special occasions from Rusk and back. Turning a locomotive takes about 15 minutes, but we've compressed the process here to save time. The railroad demonstrates this procedure several times each year. Here we see 316 taking the regular passenger train to Rusk, while Texas State number 7 waits on the siding to take families back to Rusk after a happy day spent at the pumpkin patch. Texas State number 7 is a relatively new diesel-electric locomotive built by the American Locomotive Company in 1947. She's classified as an RS2, which means the second version of a road switcher, weighs 120 tons, and has 12 cylinders, 40-inch wheels, and produces 1,500 horsepower. Many steam fans consider this class of engine to be honorary steam locomotives. Number 316 East blasts through Midale en route to Rusk. General Manager Earl Noob is at the throttle. Our final view of Midale shows the annual Pumpkin Patch event. Each year, thousands of happy children ride the train here to pick out a pumpkin for Halloween and to try out their new costumes. Boo! Located at milepost 9.0 and sitting at 348 feet elevation, Java is one of the many ghost towns located along the line. Java dates back to the 1840s but was never a very large town. For a time, trees were cut and burned to make charcoal in the area by prisoners from the state penitentiary for use in the iron furnaces in Rusk. When the Texas State Railroad was constructed through here in 1906, most residents moved to the much larger town of Midale, just 2 miles to the east. By 1910, Java was but a memory. The grade or steepness heading east out of Java is 1.5%. Listen to number 316 Stack Talk as she works hard to start a train up that hill. Let's ride along with number 16 as she heads west through the old Java town site. Note the Java sign on the right. Anyone for coffee? What County Road 2124 lacks in historical significance, it more than makes up for with photogenic qualities. This is one of several locations on the route that gives photographers a wide variety of inspiring angles to work with. It's the simple but evoking image of a quintessential county road and railroad crossing. Time stands still here, and it could pass for nearly any decade. TSR 300 West crosses County Road 2124 heading for Palestine. Here we get a view of the crew aboard 316 as they cross this scenic country road heading east toward Rusk. This final look at Tallis Creek Road shows number 316 charging east with a regular passenger train. Mushaw is the last remaining double-ended siding on the line today. It's located at milepost 11.5 and sits at 374 feet elevation. The siding is 860 feet long. Until it burned on September 27, 1909, a sawmill existed here. Trees were cut and the wood burned to make charcoal. In some cases, this was done adjacent to the track. Charcoal was preferred because it's lighter and easier to ship in railroad cars than logs. It's also easy to light and burns very hot, making it ideal for industrial uses and barbecue. The 25-ton charcoal furnace in Rusk was replaced by a coke-fired 50-ton furnace in 1904. Coke was then purchased and delivered to the prison. In addition to charcoal, several operations across the railroad, like the sawmill at Mushaw, supplied lumber for the furniture factory at the prison. The lumber operation used a Shay-type steam locomotive to operate on hastily constructed light railroad tracks that went into the woods from the main line. These tracks were moved from place to place as the timber was exhausted. There's still lumbering along the Texas State Railroad today. However, trucks haul the timber out instead of trains. Typical operating practice today is for trains to depart from Rusk and Palestine at roughly the same time, then meet in the middle of the railroad here at Mushaw. Generally, the westbound train arrives first and takes the siding, or goes in the hole, as railroaders say, while the eastbound train passes on the main line. We're watching as number 300 goes in the hole to await the arrival of the eastbound train. On this day, number 316 is taking the eastbound train to Rusk as number 300 slowly stops in the siding. On a different day, we again see 316 approaching Mushaw from the west. For a brief moment each day, the isolated siding at Mushaw, buried deep in the East Texas piney woods, becomes a living time capsule, giving passengers a glimpse into America's past. There's no other standard gauge steam-powered railroad west of the Mississippi today where you can see this remarkable procedure on a regular basis. It's truly a special event that must be experienced by any fan of history or railroads. The Narcoa convoy of privately owned motor cars comes into Mushaw from the east and takes the siding. T&P number 316 departs Mushaw to continue her journey east to Rusk. Here's number 300 coming out of the siding and up onto the main line as she continues her journey west to Palestine. Just west of Mushaw siding is milepost 12, located in the I.D. Fairchild State Forest, the largest of the 5 state forests in Texas. This 2,989-acre property was transferred from the Texas prison system in 1925 and named in honor of Texas State Senator I.D. Fairchild of Lufkin. Senator Fairchild sponsored legislation that was instrumental in rehabilitating the railroad and subsequently leasing it to the Texas and New Orleans Railroad. In effect, he saved it from certain abandonment. The tracks run through a deep cut at 380 feet above sea level. The depth of this cut makes it an ideal location for photography. In 2012, while on a scouting trip for just such a location, Everett Luke discovered it. In the spring of 2013, Everett was joined by Cody and Casey Aiken, Mark Huckabee, Kevin Gentry, John Price, Brent Mukey, Chase Bond, and Brandon McElroy. Together they cleared out a few trees, created a walking path, and constructed a loading platform for passengers. When the railroad runs photography excursions, passengers can easily unload here and hike up the hill for that perfect picture. The most impressive structure on the railroad is located between milepost 13.7 and 13.9, the Neches River Bridge. At 280 feet, the Neches crossing is the lowest point on the railroad. The bridge is 1,050 feet in length and stands 35 feet above the riverbed. The original bridge was a traditional wood pile trestle. The Texas Parks and Wildlife Department constructed modern concrete bridges across the entire railroad in the 1970s and 80s. The new Neches Bridge went up in 1980. While not as visually attractive as wood, concrete will last far longer in the damp conditions of East Texas, and this imposing structure is attractive in its own way. Just south of the Neches crossing, there was a ferry operation run by Ben Cannon from 1848 till 1851. A toll bridge replaced the ferry and operated until 1924. On the east side of the river, the Texas Southeastern Railroad, owned by the Southern Pine Lumber Company, once connected to the Texas state. The TSE line ran south to the logging town of Fastrel, then on to Diboll. The Southern Pine Lumber Company had logging land on both sides of the Neches and used the Texas State Trestle to cross over. In later years, TSE trains ran from here to Midale on Texas State rails to deliver lumber products. Let's ride along with number 316 as she crosses the Neches River from the east. Note that the Neches River has overflowed its banks. This happens when the Dallas-Fort Worth area receives heavy rains, and most of the time the Neches is confined to a narrow channel near the center of the riverbed. Here's the same view a week later on board Texas State 300. This explosion of steam is called a blowdown. The locomotive crew does this periodically to remove sediment from the boiler. It's an impressive display of the power of steam. Texas State 300 is an imposing spectacle with both blowdown valves open and a large plume of smoke as she storms across the bridge. This is being done for show, and what a show it is. The next point of interest west of the Neches River are the dual crossings of County Road 399 and County Road 1229. The crossings are at mileposts 17.1 and 17.2 and sit at 291 feet. This was the location of the town of Jarvis. It was named for a Native American, and there is a burial mound located near Stills Creek. It was the one-time home of 2 churches and a sawmill. In 1909, there was an unsuccessful oil drilling operation here. This is another spot that is ready-made for photographers. Both roads run through an idyllic country setting, and there are dozens of great angles to work with. Here's number 300 blasting through the crossings en route to Palestine. .316 heads east to Rusk. On another day, we again catch 316 heading east to Rusk. Let's enjoy the view that the engineer sees. This final view shows the running gear of 316 heading west through the crossings. The Jarvis Y was constructed in 1979 during the same period the turntable was installed at Midale. This was done to accommodate short runs from Palestine during the operating season when the Neches River trestle was being replaced. It is at milepost 17.7 and at 300 feet elevation. In past years, the Y has been used for Memorial Day celebrations. The German town of Rheinhausen was constructed as a showcase. The World War II replica Nazi town is valiantly conquered and then defended by Allied troops in an exhilarating reenactment. In recent years, Rheinhausen has been redecorated to serve as the North Pole for the annual Polar Express runs from Palestine. When the train arrives, Santa takes time from his busy schedule to go aboard and greet hundreds of smiling young faces. This is a truly magical experience for children of all ages. With Santa safely aboard, number 300 departs Jarvis for the trip back to Palestine. This annual tradition is a must for anyone with children, but be sure to book your tickets in the summer. They sell out very quickly. Located at milepost 20.8 and at 314 feet elevation is Gibson Road. Nearby Crystal Lake was the site of one of 3 water tanks that early steam locomotives used. The other 2 tanks were in North Rusk and Palestine. As the railroad was being constructed through here toward Palestine in 1906, Camp Gill was established to house the convicts doing the work. Today, there is a large clearing on the south side of the track at Gibson Road. Being one of the few open spots in the piney woods, it's used on special photography excursions. It is believed that Gibson Road was named for G.W. Gibson, the postmaster at nearby Sills Creek Post Office in the 1850s. These pacing shots of number 316 were taken from U.S. Highway 84, which runs between Rusk and Palestine. Our final stop before arriving in Palestine is Dean Wright. Just before this train arrived, your videographer was listening to a pack of coyotes howling nearby. Aboard the train, hundreds of young children are dressed in their pajamas and drinking hot chocolate as Texas State number 7 and number 300 speed the Polar Express on its way to Jarvis, the North Pole. Dean Wright is located at milepost 23.3 and sits 364 feet above sea level. The abandoned spur, which is still visible on the north side of the track, served the Dean and Wright Lumber Company sawmill at this location. This is arguably the most photogenic location on the railroad. No matter which way the train is headed, every angle offers the photographer a myriad of tasty choices to work with. We're riding on the running board of T&P number 316, heading east toward Dean Wright. The peaceful tranquility of the Dean Wright scene is suddenly shattered by 316 as she hurries her train west to Palestine. On a different day, number 300 races west on the final leg of her trip. Here are the remains of the spur that served the Dean and Wright Lumber Company. It's been many decades since these rails were last used. For our parting look at Dean Wright, we stand trackside. Texas State number 300 shatters the still night with the westbound Polar Express. Many young faces are aglow with the Christmas spirit as they each get an opportunity to visit with Santa. Texas State number 7 brings up the rear of this 11-car train, the longest that is operated each year, and the only example of distributed power on the Texas State Railroad. All westbound passenger trains make their final stop at the Palestine Depot, about 4 miles east of the center of town. Like the depot in Rusk, the Palestine Depot is not original to the railroad. The Texas Parks and Wildlife Department constructed it in October 1977 to serve tourists riding the trains. It is located at milepost 25.5 and sits 427 feet above sea level. In addition to the depot and picnic area, the facilities in Palestine include a Y, 2-stall engine house, and 2 storage tracks. Here we see Texas State number 300 traverse the Y, so she'll be facing the correct direction for the trip back to Rusk. Unlike Rusk, passengers can easily view this activity while they eat lunch at the picnic area inside the Y. Having completed her 3-point turn, number 300 is once again on the main line and is backing toward her train. On this day, she's pulling a mixed freight passenger train for photographers. Specials like this are run at least once every year. Texas and Pacific number 610 is by far the largest locomotive on the railroad today, and quite likely the largest ever to travel this line. She's a product of Lima Locomotive Works and was constructed in 1927. Number 610 was retired in 1953 and is the only surviving locomotive of her class. The 210-4 wheel arrangement classifies her as a Texas-type engine, and she was built to haul freight and passengers with equal ease at 60 miles an hour. In 1976, after a rebuild and return to service, number 610 pulled the bicentennial Freedom Train around Texas. After this illustrious duty, she was loaned to the Southern Railway for excursions on their lines. In 1986, she was retired again and sent to the Texas State Railroad for safekeeping and display. Several times each year, she is rolled out of the Palestine engine house so the public can view this massive machine up close. The Texas State Railroad is the only place where you can see two Texas and Pacific steam locomotives side by side. Here we see Texas and Pacific number 316 struggle to shove the much larger Texas and Pacific number 610 back into the engine house. This is a 79-ton locomotive moving a monstrous 224-ton locomotive. These two locomotives are the only surviving Texas and Pacific steam engines. Let's watch as number 316 departs the Palestine depot with the morning train to Rusk. On a different day, we see engineer Earl Noob take the throttle and ease his train out of the yard and on its way to Rusk. The engineer is sitting on the right and the fireman on the left. Along with maintaining a hot fire, the fireman keeps water flowing into the boiler from the tender. The locomotives on the Texas State burn recycled automotive oil. On some railroads, coal is used, and the fireman must work constantly as he moves from shoveling tons of coal to checking water levels to checking the track ahead. But on this railroad, they're able to occasionally sit back and enjoy the view. Between the engineer and fireman is the firebox. This is where the oil is burned to boil the water in the boiler, which is above and in front of the firebox. The steam that is created in the boiler is used to run the locomotive and pull the train. On a pleasant fall afternoon, we watch as number 316 returns to Palestine with the train from Rusk. Soon the passengers will disembark after a memorable day spent in the piney woods. On a brisk December evening, Texas State number 7, a 1947 Alco diesel-electric locomotive, takes an 11-car train to Jarvis, also known as the North Pole. At the west end of the Palestine Y, we see the other end of the Polar Express in the lovely sunset light. In this rarely recorded scene, we see number 316 bringing a train into Palestine from the west. This was done for a photographer's special. Our final look at Palestine shows number 316 heading along the east leg of the Y toward the main line. Sitting at these picnic tables, visitors can revel in the sights, sounds, and smells of a bygone era of American railroading. The track continues west from the Palestine Depot for about 4 miles toward the center of town. The last freight operation on this segment was in the mid-1980s and conducted by the Missouri Pacific Railroad. Since that time, the rails have been largely dormant. In 2013, after several months of work, the section was reopened as a preamble to possible future freight operations. Of interesting note, in 1913, the TSR offices were moved to Palestine from Rusk. 100 years later, the line was reopened into Palestine. So let's take a quick look at this rarely seen, rarely used stretch of track. The first crossing west is County Road 323 at milepost 26.2. The spur just east of the road is being reconstructed so that Bayes Chemical can ship its product to oil fields around the country. Next is Loop 256 at milepost 27.3. The state of Texas paid to have these modern crossing gates installed in the 1980s. Continuing west, we enter a residential neighborhood. Here we see Redwood Street at milepost 27.5 and Oakhurst Street at milepost 27.6. This was once a flag stop for the Wherry Lumber Company. The company was based in Neches, Texas, but had a small mill here in Palestine. The line goes under Highway 287 at milepost 27.9. This is the highest point on the railroad at 545 feet above sea level. The end of the line today is the junction with the Union Pacific Railroad's Palestine subdivision just west of Royal Street at milepost 29.5. Union Pacific runs 12 to 15 trains per day through here. Of the 4 railroads that the Texas state once connected to, this is the only remaining junction. Interestingly, the rails used to follow a different alignment at this location and cross over the International and Great Northern Railroad here. Then they turned north, following their own right-of-way into central Palestine. In fact, the rails are still in place today, although they've been covered by the forest. Let's take a quick look at what remains. South Sycamore Street, West Cook Street, West Burkett Street, near this location on West Reagan Street, the Texas State Railroad had its Palestine Depot. Originally, the Texas State interchanged with the International and Great Northern. Later, that railroad became the Missouri Pacific, and today is the Union Pacific. UP's Palestine yard sees dozens of trains each day coming and going from Houston, Longview, and Hearne. In November 2013, Texas State Number 300, with General Manager Earl Noob at the throttle, made an extraordinarily rare trip into town using Union Pacific's rails. This was done to return the private car Caritas to the yard so it could be coupled to the rear of Amtrak's Texas Eagle, which had been detoured through Palestine. The day before, the Caritas made another rare move as she traveled over the Texas State to Rusk. This was the first such private car to visit the TSR in many decades and is an exciting indication of what the future could hold. Well, there you have it. It's quite a 30-mile ride, isn't it? There's some wonderful history with this little railroad, and we hope you'll come and see it in person sometime. Whether you ride a regular passenger train or come for one of our special events, you'll be more than welcome. I'm Ed Stabler. Happy railroading.